In this episode, we're going to learn how influential we as humans can be on wildlife populations and habitats. And we're going to accomplish this by learning about an incredible woman named Fannye Cook, one of the most extraordinary, impactful, and bold conservationists to ever live. And when you get to the end of this story, you'll realize I'm not exaggerating. So grab a seat or hold on to something, because this story is going to blow your mind. It's a Friday afternoon, and I'm walking into the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science. I have an appointment with a man named Scott, who is the collections manager, to see some of the original work that literally shaped the conservation history of the state of Mississippi.
And she ran a bigger, project from mid-1930s, the early 1940s, documenting plants and animals throughout the state. So she had a lot of people working for her who were.
As I follow Mr. Scott through the maze of museum hallways, my eyes are constantly being pulled to different sites. A paleontology room on the right filled with prehistoric bones, murals of wildlife hanging on the walls, until finally he opens a door on the right-hand side of the hallway and walks in. We enter a small room that reminds me of the biology labs that I sat in during my years as a wildlife science student at Mississippi State. On one of the work tables, they are laid out an assortment of collected and preserved plant and animal specimens.
So she did a lot of bird collecting.
Yeah, she got a green-winged teal there.
The green-winged teal, this one was collected in 1924, which predates the museum by a number of years.
1924. I'm holding a preserved green-winged teal from 1924. That's 101 years old. If that isn't crazy enough, this specimen was part of the first wildlife research ever done in Mississippi. This was done in a time when there was very little known about wildlife populations, distributions, what all types of species lived in a state. It was a different world. And it's crazy to think about.
This was a beaver skull that she collected from, this was 1940s.
It's, man, I know it's wild to me because I've done so much research on this woman at this point. Mm-hmm. It's just crazy to see, crazy to see something that she collected herself.
That's good. I've got some more specimens in another room. These are all dry specimens, but I've got fish, reptiles.
Yeah, pretty incredible woman. The work Fannye Cook would have done would have been kind of the first baseline, is that correct?
That would have been baseline from Mississippi.
I went with Scott down several more hallways, into several more rooms, checking out preserved fish specimens that also dated back to the early 1900s, preserved plants like the first documented kudzu in the state, and several more than that. More than I have time to mention, to be fully honest. The collection size was pretty astounding. But now, I bet y'all have a lot of questions, like, why am I so interested in these old animal and plant collections? Who is this mysterious woman that myself and the museum collections manager keep referring to? Well, don't worry, because I'm going to answer all of your questions. But first, I have to set the stage. In 1929, Mississippi was the only state in the country that did not have any game laws. There were no seasons, no bag limits, no regulations, no game wardens, no wildlife biologists. There was no game and fish department. Market hunting was rampant. Plume hunting was rampant. Timber harvest was unchecked. And the state, my home state, was on a steady path towards complete and utter destruction of its natural resources. How do we know this? Because it's very well documented. Aldo Leopold, which I'm confident is a name most of you already know, made a trip down to Mississippi during this time and wrote a report on it. I'm going to quote Leopold's report directly as he gives his account of the condition of Mississippi's natural resources in 1929. The game situation in Mississippi. Quail are holding in their entire available range, but in decreasing abundance due to overshooting unaccompanied by cultural measures. Wild turkey are still decreasing. They have been cleaned out of the upland ranges, and there's barely a seed stock left in the larger swamps. The factors determining the turkey crop are imperfectly known, but it is a safe guess that they are overkilled in this state. Refuges, education, law enforcement, and fact-finding are badly needed. White-tailed deer are in light case, but the decimation of the remaining stock is more complete. Waterfowl are not especially investigated, but it is obvious that they need refuges if the shooting is to hold up. Pheasants have been tried, but so far failed. It is probably not possible to introduce them. By and large, small game conditions are fair, and big game conditions bad in Mississippi. The present game supply, except for a few private preserves so far, is the result of accident rather than design. There is no state game department and only the beginnings of a conservation movement. There is no refuge system, very little law enforcement. While there are beginnings of game management on a few preserves, the people of Mississippi are still a long way from either wanting or understanding conservation. End quote. So, if Mississippi was in that poor of a state in 1929, it leads me to ask the question of what happened. I mean, something must have happened, right? I mean, look at Mississippi now in 2025. We have an incredibly dense deer population, so much so that the Wildlife Department is actually asking hunters to shoot more deer. We have a very popular spring turkey season. We have duck and goose seasons, and many, many others. So what happened? What turned the ship around? It's time for all of you to learn about the incredible life and work of Miss Fannye Cook, the woman who saved the natural resources of Mississippi. Fannye Cook was born in Crystal Springs, Mississippi in 1889. She grew up amongst 6 sisters and 3 brothers in one of the biggest farming families in the city. When Fannye was a child, she showed early interest in the natural world. There's a biography written on the life of Miss Cook that is titled Fannye Cook, Mississippi's Pioneering Conservationist. And in it, it makes note that her father told her about the plight of the passenger pigeon when she was just a child, explaining to her how the sky once upon a time would literally fill up with flocks of these pigeons, billions of them, and now they were gone. It's always been believed that this had an effect on Fannye. When Fannye got older, she moved away from Crystal Springs. She spent some time teaching in Panama. She moved up to Wyoming for a spell. She eventually would wind up in Washington, D.C., where she planned to get a PhD in ornithology, the study of birds. It was during this time that she got a job working at the Smithsonian and received her first formal training in collecting plant and animal specimens for scientific use. This would end up being a very important part in Fannye's life, as her path would eventually lead her to a place where her scientific knowledge of wildlife would be invaluable. Okay, we've covered all the preliminaries, we've set the stage, and now we get to the real meat of the story. In 1926, Fannye Cook returned home to Mississippi to find it in a severely depleted state in terms of its natural resources. It was then that her real work began. And I feel like there's one more important factor that cannot go unmentioned. Like I said earlier, Fannye's most important work started around 1926. During this time in our country, the treatment of women was very, very different. The 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, had just been passed 6 years prior in 1920. This was a different culture. Remember that as we move forward in this story, because not only does it make her accomplishments more impressive, but it also comes into play in this story several times. To help me tell this story, I enrolled the help of a very special woman. Her name is Miss Libby Hartfield, and she was the director of the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science for 37 years. I want to kick this off by letting Miss Hartfield tell you a few funny stories about Fannye Cook. They'll make you laugh, but they'll also give you an idea of the kind of energy and attitude that Miss Cook had.
The first story, her sister told us. She said we were going to Georgia Bell Carpets, and Fannye was driving us, a group of ladies from Crystal Springs, and she was always slowing down and grabbing her binoculars to look at something on the road, and we were all mad at her. And she said, so she pulls the car over, and she says, I got to have that bird. She had her gun in the back of the car. She shoots the bird, so they're all, getting mad and standing there by the side of the road by a pond. And she said she stripped down and got that bird. And she says, we were so mad. She says, I didn't talk to her for 2 days after that. But it was, and she had never been a good driver. She was a legendary bad driver because they said she's always looking over there at a bird and she'll run you in the gravel in a minute, they would say. So her friends didn't really like for her to drive them. The biologist and the conservation officer sort of took turns going with her to the field because she was getting older, she was in her 60s. So then the conservation officer tells this story. He said that she shot a bird. she asked the officer to go get it because it fell in the water. And he said, that water's too cold, Miss Cook, I'm not going out there to get it. And she said, well, then turn around, I'll get it. And so he said she stripped down and ran out there and got that bird and came back. And that's when she was real mad. She says, I've always said there wasn't anything a man could do a woman couldn't do better. And so she was...
I know a couple of folks I could accuse of being a bad driver, but none of which for the sake of pulling over to collect a bird in the name of science. Now that we have a better idea of the kind of charisma Miss Fannye Cook possessed, let's dig into her work. You can't appreciate Miss Cook completely until you understand what she fully pulled us out of.
Why did we need? She wasn't just creating a bureaucracy.
Right, yeah.
She was really trying to save some things. Pretty much, from what she could tell, every state had a department that was in charge of dealing with wildlife in each state, and they had statewide laws. Mm-hmm. The most that Mississippi had at that time were some counties that had an interest and they had laws, and the sheriff's department would enforce those laws. And even by the admission of some of the sheriffs, that was a very hard thing to do. And so I don't think they minded getting some statewide assistance with that too. You know,
right.
You didn't want to be the one to go out and tell your brother-in-law he couldn't be hunting at night. So, yeah, it made sense to have a dedicated agency to a lot of people. So in 1927, she founded what she called the Mississippi Association for the Conservation of Wildlife. And we're not talking about a dozen people. She had 286 charter members. And included in those were judges and bankers and business owners from all over the state. So she must have done some really quick work if she came back to the state in 26 and a year later started this foundation that had a really powerful board and a lot of people already interested. There were bound to have been some people all around that wanted conservation.
To refer back to Leopold's quote from earlier, you may remember him speaking of an early but small conservation movement, and that it was taking place on what he called private preserves. This would have been private land that was well managed and also relatively protected from market hunting. When Fannye established her association, it's believed that many of her first members were some of these same landowners. This association would be kind of like today's equivalent of a local Ducks Unlimited or NWTF chapter, and it was a significant step forwards towards her end goal of getting an actual game and fish department established in the state. You could join this group of fine conservation-minded folks for an annual fee of $1. I'm going to read you the bulleted list that Fannye put together as kind of the mission statement for this association. This would have been put out on pamphlets and posters for people to see to help advertise it. I think this gives us a very clear understanding of where her head was at from the very beginning. This is Fannye's list. More sport for the sportsman. More furs for the trapper. More fish in the streams. More beneficial hawks and owls to eat field rats and mice. More songbirds in town and country. More holly, wild crab apples, dogwood and azalea to beautify roadsides and woodlands. More boys and girls, men and women, who love the outdoors and who go there with seeing eyes and hearing ears. I don't know about y'all, but that's something I can get behind. I want to ask Miss Hartfield about some of the attitudes of the general public at the time. How did they feel about a conservation movement, market hunting, and so on? It's easy to throw stones at market hunting now. And not that I'm not trying to draw up a picture that I'm a fan of market hunting. I'm not. But one thing that I struggle with is I look back at that and I go, should I be mad about that? But then I'm like, man, if those people were actually like, this is how I get food for my family, then it's different.
Oh, definitely.
So
yeah.
I'm looking at it like if it's in the middle of the Depression and you have somebody pushing for regulations on how you gather this wild game, there probably had to be some friction there.
The key to that is that the market hunters, the plume hunters, had just kind of gotten beat down. You know, at first they were collecting those feathers all over and just killing rookeries and things.
Explain what a plume hunter is.
Okay, plume hunter, starting in, I think, about the 1880s and maybe even before that, feathers just became the height of fashion, even for some men's garments, men's hats. You'd always see that little feather in the hat. A pheasant feather was popular in a man's hat. Women would sometimes have a whole pheasant on top of their head. It was just gotten to the point of bizarre. But when you think about how those birds were collected, it damaged bird populations really all over the world, but particularly North America. I guess we had a lot of millinery establishments at that point, so they were selling the hats. And birds in England, the English people did pass laws first, but it may be that they were decimated first too.
Wow.
And then, so in the United States, people were starting to cry out, because the hunters for the feathers would just go out and kill everything in the rookery, and then adjacent landowner would go down there, and they said there were baby birds dying in the nest, nothing we could do.
Yeah.
And so people's feelings were hurt that was happening, and they weren't getting any money for it.
Wow.
Because they weren't paying the landowner. This was out-of-state establishments evidently coming and just traveling around hunting.
Yeah.
Well, so the market hunting was similar, is what the way Fannye Cook's letters kind of lay it out, is that out-of-state interests were coming down. They would get close to a railroad line. They might hire some local people to round up game, though, and then they would slaughter it, put it on ice, and take it all north. So local people, when they went out to hunt, the deer was gone.
Really, what you're describing there, that sounds like a different world.
Yeah.
Like that, everything that you're describing sounds bizarre.
Yeah.
Right.
And so maybe the landowner got paid something for him harvesting his deer, and maybe not much of anything, but it sounds like a lot of the landowners decided this is not the way to go either.
Wow.
Whoever these 286 people that joined her organization, they were kind of making a stand against that.
Right. So you had people that were obviously in favor of it, but then obviously she met some friction as well.
I think so, because it certainly slowed down.
Right.
It took 7 years.
7 years.
To do what
to get
her
it
was obvious.
Right. Right. Let me throw you a hypothetical situation. Imagine you and your family own a chunk of hunting land, and you find out one day that a group of guys from out of state that you don't even know came through your property and shot every deer they saw, put it on ice, and shipped it off to be sold. Aside from feeling enraged, it also sounds pretty bizarre and outlandish, right? Well, if you were around Mississippi in the 1920s, this could be a very common reality. This is the complicated and conflicted side of our history with our wildlife. And while it's not the prettiest, I feel it's important that we know it. This is why Fannye Cook was on a mission to establish a game commission. And if you caught the last bit of what Miss Hartfield said there, she gave a little bit away. The Game and Fish Commission that Fannye Cook was determined to establish would take her 7 years to get done.
She did 2 or 3 things that to me were just genius, and I don't know if, again, there was probably some luck involved, but also some intent. She was always collecting things, and she was a pretty good taxidermist. So she made little wildlife scenes, dioramas and things. She started taking them to the fairs, county fairs and the state fair. And one year, I think it was right there close to when the bill passed, that last year, she went to the state fair, and her little building on wildlife was so popular that when the fair closed, they had to keep it open because everybody said, we haven't gotten to see it yet. So that, to me, that was the beginning of the museum. Later, all those specimens, because we've seen pictures of her fair exhibits, as she called them.
Yeah.
And she said, she said, this means a lot to me because I had to take my precious specimens out and expose them to the dirt and dust of the state fair. But she did it.
Yeah. Today, if you want to start any sort of organization, start a movement, get the word out there, whatever, there are all kinds of outlets at your disposal. The most powerful among them being things like social media, podcast, email blast, etc. But when Fannye was doing all this, it was the 1920s. So this one determined woman was sending out letters to legislators, forming wildlife conservation groups, taxidermying animals, and carting them around to fairs in the name of teaching wildlife conservation. All in the name of trying to get a game and fish department established. That's some serious determination. I'm curious about how she was managing to do all of this. Did she get any funding for all of her campaigning and going to the state fair? Did she have any help, or was she just going upon her own initiative to do all this?
In 1929, she did an interview with the Jackson Daily News, which is a really, to me, a very well-written. It was at Camp Kickapoo, which is close over here. A reporter says that I interviewed Miss Cook, and she said, Cook set Indian fashion on a hillside and talked to me about it. And basically what she said was, this is a sorry state of affairs in Mississippi. We've got to get this done. But the reporter asked her, how do you fund your campaign? And she laughed and said, I'm pretty much unfunded. She says, I have a large, generous family that helps me a lot. And she says, and if I'm low on funds, she says, I stand pretty good with my family. And when I get hungry, I hang my feet under my dad's table. If I fall out with him, I guess I'll go visit him.
So largely self-propelled, Miss Cook. Mm-hmm. Self-motivated, self-initiative, some help from family, some help with an office, but mostly she did all this. Mm-hmm. And that's what's so crazy to me. Even if she was trying to save the natural resources of her hometown, it would still be noble, but it would make more sense because it's like she's trying, but she's lobbying for the entire state, and she's lobbying for, and it's like, man, like, where does she get that drive? Where did such a conviction to do this? Where did it come from?
Yeah, I've wondered that. Why did she think she could do this?
Yeah, why? And talking about a different world. She's leading this charge in a culture that they're just getting used to women being able to vote. And she's leading the charge on all this. It's insane to me. Where did she get the drive to do this? Self-propelled, self-funded, with the exception of a little help from her family, Fannye was for the most part a one-woman force, and a force that was starting to get momentum. And speaking of that, one of the biggest upticks Fannye got in her campaign for wildlife conservation came in 1929, when the widely perceived father of wildlife management and conservation, Aldo Leopold, made a trip down to Mississippi to write a report. This would be the same trip and report that resulted in the quote that we read at the beginning of the episode, where Leopold is essentially listing off the evident abuse of Mississippi's natural resources and calling for change by way of a structured game and fish system.
Aldo Leopold went with her to Lake Chautauqua when he went to Crystal Springs.
Did not know that.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
We know that because in some letters, like here's one, I've got a quote in the letter. She refers to, you remember the partridge berries which you noticed in the woodland near Lake Chautauqua. I'm sending you seeds.
She sent Aldo Leopold seeds for a partridge pea.
For a partridge berries that he had seen at Lake Chautauqua.
That's cool.
So, and obviously they had kind of a friendly relationship.
Yeah.
So we don't know if she even influenced him coming to the state.
We're not
We
sure.
have no proof that she did. We don't have any letters or anything. But it was just awfully coincidental, wasn't it? It makes me think that it could have been that she knew somebody to ask.
Yeah. Because he sought her out when he came down here.
Yes. And we have a list in his report of the landowners that he went to see. Mm-hmm. And if you lay it up against her board, it's pretty much identical.
Really?
Yeah.
So there was definitely some coordination there.
Yeah.
That is too cool.
Yeah.
If you compare the list of landowners Leopold went to visit when he came down to Mississippi to the list of Fannye Cook's board of her Mississippi Association for Conservation of Wildlife, it's pretty much identical. Leopold also sought her out when he came down here and asked her for help and reference with his report. Not to mention, by the time he made it down here, she had been on her campaign for 3 years. And while we can't prove outright that she was a driving force in getting him to come down here, I think we can all agree there's an awful lot of evidence to suggest that she played a huge role. There's also one more thing I want to add while we're on the subject of Leopold. The quote that we read earlier. You remember, the real depressing one about the wildlife of Mississippi on the verge of being wiped out? Well, there's a little more to it, and I'm going to read it to you now. Begin quote. There is one offset to all these defects, a widespread and intense popular interest in game and hunting. In this respect, Mississippi excels any other state so far surveyed by me. End quote. Leopold then goes on to say in so many words that leveraging this popularity of hunting and using education and agencies would be the only way to maintain a game supply in Mississippi. I have to say, one of the coolest discoveries I made while researching for this episode was seeing the clear lines that both Aldo Leopold and Fannye Cook drew connecting hunters and conservationists as the clear pathway for saving wildlife. And they also drew a hard line between market hunters and conservationists. In fact, the term they used to explain the two were game hogs and sportsmen. The momentum gained by Leopold's 1929 trip and report would carry through until the year 1932. In January of 1932, the newly elected governor of Mississippi stated in his first address that he wanted to see a Game and Fish Commission established. And while there was no physical evidence to prove he had been influenced by Fannye Cook, she had been on a self-propelled campaign for 7 years at this point, pushing for this exact thing. Writing to legislators, visiting legislators, attending fairs, the displays, the presentations, the clubs, the associations, the Aldo Leopold expeditions. So y'all believe what you want to believe. But me personally, I'm rolling with Miss Cook on this one. She convinced the governor to push for the commission, and you can't lead me to believe otherwise. The woman was a needle mover. The commission gets established.
Yeah.
In my purview, or like my understanding, it's like you have this woman that was obvious to everybody, was the main one pushing for it. I would think that she's obvious to be like, all right, well, you're in charge of this commission. You're the one that's been pushing for it for 7 years. That didn't happen.
Yeah. And once again, we have some letters. She wrote to, there's a Dr. Barch who was pretty well known, and his luck would have it, and I think this was just luck. He was one of her professors, and she helped him at the Smithsonian as well. In this letter to Dr. Barch, she says, we've done it. We've got our organization now. And there were letters from him all along where she was talking about her work, and he was always encouraging her to keep pushing and keep pushing. And so it was like, hallelujah, we've got it. And she says, they've offered me a job within the agency and asked me what I wanted to be. And she says, I don't think I want to be a commissioner because they don't get paid, and it's just going to be a temporary kind, it'll be just for a term. She says, I think I want to do something more permanent with the agency. She says, I can't imagine being head of the agency because you would be so involved in law enforcement.
Okay.
She says, so I think I would probably be better suited in something in research and education.
So she chose not to to lead it.
In a way, she did. But you could tell she wasn't positive. So he writes her back and basically says, congratulations, you've done so much hard work, you've really earned this. And then he just lays it right out there. He says, if you were a man, any of those statutory positions that are in the law would be perfect for you. He said, you women are hard creatures to place, which is a strange way to put it, isn't it? He says, I think that you would be better suited for education and research. And he says, and you don't want to take the chance of damaging the very thing you've spent all your time creating.
Wow.
So that's had to be a little heartbreaking. He's telling her it wouldn't be good for your agency for you to be the head of it now that you made it.
Man. So
he said, you don't want to hurt the very thing you've spent so much of your time and effort in creating.
And again, it's like I'm trying to read the tone of a letter that was sent so many years ago. But in my head, it's like, even if he did feel that way, which obviously he did, it's like Fannye already said that she didn't really want to do that anyway. He didn't have to say all that. He didn't have to say.
No, he didn't. But somehow he just laid it
did.
out there. Maybe he didn't want her to take the chance of saying, I want to be executive director. He thought that would be wrong.
So in one letter, he fully acknowledges, like he credits her for working really hard, earning it. Like, you're the one that got this here, that got this agent. He credits her to creating it. Yeah. And in the same letter, he says, you would damage it if you let it.
When I can't remember if it was me or Kathy that found the letter, but I remember that we both just cried when we read it.
So you and Miss Kathy found that original letter. I did not know that.
In her papers, yeah.
Man.
I mean, we were working amongst all of her stuff. It was all there. I think she was fine with not getting the credit, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah. She was really in it for the sake of the resource.
She really was. Yeah, we could have lost all the game in the state, I guess. I think things could have been decimated. You want to think, well, if she didn't do it, somebody else would have stepped up and done it. But
Maybe.
I don't know who, because they hadn't done it yet.
And we were at such a breaking point. It's like, and her establishing that commission, when the commission got established, I do know one of the first things they started working on was turkey reestablishment. And everyone know like how important turkey hunting is down here. And it took her 7 years to establish that commission. So if she wouldn't have done it, I don't think it's outlandish for me to say we might have wiped them out completely.
Oh, yeah, I think we could have, yeah.
When Leopold did his survey, there was an estimate of 1,200 deer in the state. She came at the nick of time.
Yeah.
If anybody, not just a resident, if anybody has hunted, fished, or enjoyed the natural resources of the state of Mississippi in any way, you owe Miss Cook your gratitude.
Oh, I think that's definitely true, yeah. The beginnings of all the wildlife management areas, she laid them out there with that first staff at the agency.
WMAs.
Yeah, the WMAs would not be there without if they hadn't done it.
Game reintroductions.
Yeah.
I mean, so she had like first like hands-on involvement in establishing public land. She had hands-on involvement in reintroductions of several game species.
Yeah.
The fishes of Mississippi, land mammals, snakes of Mississippi. She did all of this.
Yeah. Horn Island, Ship Island, evidently those things would not have been saved. They would have been just sold to private landowners if she hadn't been there.
How long did she stay with the agency? Was she stayed involved for...
Yeah, and at that time there was no elder rights, I guess, at that time. You had to retire at 70.
Okay.
And there is a remark somewhere that says she was the oldest person in the Game and Fish Commission when she retired.
So once she started, she didn't leave? She stayed?
She stayed until they pretty much, state government forced her to retire because she had to. But she kept working. One of the reasons that I think she was okay with retiring, she was trying to finish this book.
Okay. The Fishes of Mississippi.
Fishes of Mississippi. And she was not the greatest typist, and so she wrote to Mr. Gandy and asked him if she could use his secretary at the museum to finish her book. And he said yes, and so she, drove back, I guess, back and forth from Crystal Springs until she and the secretary finished the book, and it was published the next year in 59. And then she died in 64.
The day before she passed away, she was on a tour. She was on a bird tour. Is that
true?
She
led a group of Boy Scouts on a birding trip the day before she died.
So she never stopped. She never stopped doing it. I almost feel like you could look at the end of Miss Cook's life and feel like it was something out of a movie script. She spends years creating this commission. When the commission gets established, she's told she can work there, but she's not allowed to run it. But she doesn't care. She cares so much about the work that she stays there until she's forced to retire. And then spends her retirement taking kids out on bird viewing tours and finishing books that would aid Mississippi's wildlife and wildlife biologists for years to come. Case in point, the collected work of hers that I went and saw at the museum that's still being used today. And the very day before her passing of a heart attack, she was taking a group of Boy Scouts on a bird tour. I'm just going to come right out and say it. This woman does not get the credit she deserves. But I'm curious how Miss Libby Hartfield feels about this.
I would agree, of course. I do think she does. But I also think that wouldn't matter very much to her.
How long did you work at the museum?
37 years.
It's clear Fannye Cook means something to you. You and Miss Kathy. Why does she mean so much to you?
I don't know exactly. I think we felt like if she did that, we could too.
Miss Fannye Cook, a naturalist, a wildlife biologist, an establisher of public lands, and the woman who saved the natural resources of Mississippi. One of the greatest conservationists to ever live. I told y'all I wasn't exaggerating. I want to thank all of you for listening to Backwoods University, as well as Beargrease and This Country Life. And I want to give a big shout out to Onyx Hunt for making this podcast possible. If you like this episode, share it with a friend and stick around, because there's a whole lot more on the way.